Elias Thorne did not move fast, but when he moved, every action was heavy with intent. He stood in the unforgiving noonday sun, the shadow of his 6-foot frame stretching long and thin across the dirt access road that bordered the Thorne Ranch. What he was looking at was not just wreckage. It was an insult, the fourth iteration of the same calculated negligence. The gate, custom-built from thick, cured oak and reinforced with hand-welded steel bars, designed to withstand the weight of a nervous bull, not the careless impact of a German luxury SUV, was destroyed. The main hinge post was snapped clean at the base, its foundation violently excavated from the soil. The gate itself was twisted into a grotesque, metal-splintered Z, lying a dozen feet from the road's shoulder like a felled monument. He knelt, not touching the debris, but studying the evidence. The tire tracks were shallow but distinct, high-performance radials, aggressively wide, abruptly turning off the main county line, correcting too late, and then accelerating away. He recognized them instantly. They belonged to the white Mercedes G-Wagon driven by Selena Vance, the woman who lived at the apex of the new, sprawling, offensively bright development, Vance Crest, that had cropped up just over the ridge 3 years ago. The first gate incident, Elias had dismissed as a genuine accident, a moment of inattentiveness on a foggy night. He'd sent a polite but firm invoice. The second, 6 months later, felt less like an accident and more like an inconvenience to her. The accompanying check was clipped to a note that read, "Oops, sorry. Too much wine, haha. Call my assistant for the repair crew." The third, 8 months after that, came with no note, just a cold wire transfer, the equivalent of dropping loose change. But this was four times she had treated the boundary of his ancestral land, the line between his life and her frivolous world, as a minor, correctable expense. Elias straightened, the action pulling the fabric tight across the broad shoulders of his sun-faded work shirt. He didn't feel rage. Rage was hot and fleeting. He felt something colder, more profound, the sickening realization that deterrence was impossible. That communication was useless, and that his life, the slow, deliberate, meaningful work of 3 generations on this ranch, was nothing but scenery to her. He pulled his phone, a rugged mud-cake device, and didn't call the police. He didn't call his lawyer. He called his foreman, Javier. "Javier, it's done. The north gate. Get Miguel on the old welding rig. Pull the whole damn thing out. No, don't replace it. Just seal the line with the temporary fencing we use for the south pasture, the cheap wire. We're not rebuilding this gate, not yet. We're changing the landscape." Elias's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which Javier knew was infinitely more dangerous than shouting. "The Vance woman again, boss?" Javier asked, the static crackling slightly. "The Vance woman again," Elias confirmed. "I'm taking the truck. I have a visit to make." Selena Vance's house was everything Elias hated about the new money that had bled into the valley. It was a fortress of polished white stucco and glass, designed to look imposing but managing only to look sterile. It sat on a terraced hill, a monument to zero-maintenance landscaping and abstract art. Elias pulled his beat-up, diesel-chugging Ford F-250 right up to the electronic keypad gate, which was, ironically, pristine and leaned on the horn, not a courtesy tap, a long, sustained blast that vibrated the glass in the main bay window. A moment later, the gate hissed open. Elias drove through the perfect circular drive, pulling the truck onto the polished travertine pavers just shy of the front door. The contrast between the truck, caked in the same red dust that covered thousands of acres of his grazing land, and the immaculate white entryway, was violent. Selena Vance appeared almost instantly, emerging from the house like a sleek, agitated heron. She was wearing designer yoga gear that looked unused, and her face was already tightened into a mask of aggressive annoyance. "Elias! What in God's name? That horn is criminal! You know, that noise could startle the baby." She gestured vaguely toward the house. Elias didn't acknowledge the greeting or the implied urgency. He unfolded himself from the truck, closing the heavy door with a sound that felt like thunder in the rarefied air of her courtyard. "Your G-Wagon." Elias said, his voice low. He didn't raise it, which forced her to stop her self-righteous approach and actually listen. It hit the north gate, again, about an hour ago. Selena's perfect eyebrows knitted in a practiced expression of confused concern. Oh, right, the gate. Look, I'm so sorry. I was on a call with the architect. I missed the turn for the delivery access. Honestly, that gate is so poorly marked, Elias. You really should put reflectors or something on those posts. Elias let the absurd suggestion hang in the air. Poorly marked? It was a heavy 5-bar gate across a private road, clearly visible for a quarter-mile. This is the 4th time. Selena, he stated. She waved a dismissive hand, reaching for the small sequined bag slung over her shoulder. Yes, I know. And I've paid every time. Look, don't make a scene. How much is it this time? Double it, triple it. Just tell me what your contractor charges and I'll send a wire immediately. I'm having a meeting in 15 minutes. It's not about the money, Elias said, taking a slow step forward. The space between them shrank, and for the first time, Selena seemed to register that this interaction was different. The coldness radiating off him was palpable, like standing too close to a commercial freezer unit. Everything is about the money, Elias. That's how the world works now. Just name the number. She stopped fishing for her wallet, crossing her arms instead. Unless you're going to be dramatic about this? Are we going to have to drag lawyers into this minor skirmish? Because my lawyer is on retainer. Yours probably still charges by the hour. The jab, intended to be wounding, barely registered. Elias saw the insult not as a blow to his pride, but as confirmation of her entire corrosive worldview. My gate, Elias began, his voice taking on a low, lecturing cadence, is more than wood and steel. It takes me 3 hours to drive the perimeter and 2 men a full day to install a gate post correctly. When you drive through it, you don't just cost me lumber. You cost me security. I have 300 head of Black Angus grazing that north pasture. When that gate is open or destroyed, those cattle are unsecured. They wander onto the county road, they get hit by passing traffic, I get sued for negligence, or they walk off into the canyons. My investment, my reputation, my stock, all compromised for your momentary distraction. He paused, letting his gaze drift past her, toward the massive, untouched glass walls of her house. You've paid for 4 gates, but you haven't paid for the 48 hours of labor, the fuel, the risk, or the fundamental breach of respect. Selena's impatience finally curdled into defensive anger. Oh, please! Don't lecture me about respect, Elias. You're a rancher. I'm an investor. My development brought jobs and value to this dead-end county. You want to pretend you're some martyr for the land? Fine. But stop with the moralizing. I will write you a check for $10,000 right now to cover the damage and the inconvenience. Will that make your little poetic point? Elias looked at the checkbook she now held, pristine and white. He didn't reach for it. You don't understand the game you're playing, Selena, he said softly. You think property is defined by what you can buy. You think a boundary is fixed by the price of a fence post? I think differently. He stepped back toward his truck, putting his hand on the grimy door handle. The payment is no longer cash, Elias announced. The payment is consequence. He turned, opened the door, and slid into the cab. As the massive engine roared to life, Selena screamed after him, her voice high and thin against the diesel rumble. What is that supposed to mean, Elias? I'm calling the sheriff! I'm calling my lawyer! You can't just walk away from a settlement. Elias didn't look back. He shifted the truck into drive, leaving deep, tire tread scars in her perfect travertine driveway as he pulled away. He drove for an hour, back toward the ranch headquarters, past the fields where the first signs of green were just beginning to show after a long, dry winter. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Selena was right about one thing. Paying for damage was how the world worked now. But Elias was a man tethered to the past, a man who understood leverage, land, and the long game. $10,000 would buy him a new gate. It would not buy him back the respect she had casually incinerated, and it would not stop the 5th time or the 6th. Her entitlement was the root cause, and he had to attack the root, not the symptom. He pulled up to the main office, a solid 100-year-old structure built of river stone. Javier was waiting for him outside, wiping grease from his hands. So? Javier asked, his eyes searching Elias's face. She offered 10 grand. To cover everything, Javier whistled low. That's good money, boss. Take it, pay the crew, and put up a heavier gate this time. No, Elias said, walking past him into the dim office. The air inside smelled of old leather, paper, and cooled stone. A gate is just a boundary. Boundaries are meaningless to people like her. They only respect what they truly lose. He walked straight to the large old drafting table that served as his desk. Spread out beneath a heavy piece of glass was the original survey map of the Thorn Ranch, overlaid with the new disturbing, jagged lines of T. The following morning dawned over the valley, deceptively peaceful. For Elias Thorn, however, it was the opening movement of a well-rehearsed battle. He sat in his office before sunrise, not at the drafting table, but in front of a monitor, watching bank transaction notifications. At 7:02 a.m., the notification he sought appeared. Transfer initiated. $10,000, Vance Ventures. The check Selena had written yesterday had cleared. The contract in her eyes was settled. The window of her false security was now officially sealed shut. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. He hadn't slept, spending the night fine-tuning the legal payload. Javier arrived shortly after, smelling of engine grease and strong coffee. He looked exhausted, but his eyes held a kind of nervous exhilaration. It's done, boss. Like you said, I had to call half the state to find 3 firms who weren't already retained by Vance Crest, but we got them. Jensen and Associates, High Voltage Regulatory, Krell Group, Historical Land Use, and the heavy hitter, Old Man Tiberius Stone himself, for litigation oversight. They've each got copies of the original 48 utility agreement and the plat maps. They are expensive, Elias, truly outrageous. Elias simply nodded, pouring 2 cups of the ranch's bitter black coffee. Good. Outrageous is what we need. It signals seriousness. They start on the clock now. The notice of intent to exercise easement rights. Is it drafted, signed, sealed, and ready for delivery? It's a masterpiece of bureaucracy. 3 pages of dense, archaic legal terminology, citing state codes from the 1960s. It never mentions the gate, never mentions her trespassing, only the necessity of modernizing the existing utility corridor and conducting environmental remediation surveys within the designated. Recorded 50-foot boundary. Javier handed him a thick, sealed envelope labeled with the terrifyingly dull letterhead of Tiberius Stone's firm. And the delivery? Elias asked, tapping the seal. Being hand-delivered to her registered corporate address, which is her house, by a bonded process server at 9 a.m. sharp. He's already in the county. Elias took a slow sip of coffee, the heat a welcome burn in his throat. She is a creature of money, Javier. She respects documents only if they have a dollar sign. This document, this is the first true cost she will encounter that she cannot simply pay off. Up on the hill at Vance Crest, Selena was basking in the glow of a problem solved. The $10,000 check had been a masterstroke, she thought. She'd paid Elias off handsomely, humiliating his sense of self-importance with her casual wealth, and now she was rid of him. She even took the time to send a crisp text message to her assistant. Confirm Elias Thorn's bank draft cleared. If he calls, tell him any future communication must go through my legal department. Block his number. The confirmation came back swiftly. Payment cleared, Ms. Vance. Issue closed. Selena smiled, looking out the massive 2-story glass wall of her kitchen. The view was, as always, stunning. The whole valley floor spread out like a wrinkled map, ending in the endless brown and green sprawl of the Thorn Ranch. She was on a video call with her landscape architect, discussing the final touches on the new infinity pool. I want the view from the zero edge to be completely uninterrupted, Marcus. No sightlines of that ugly barbed wire fence he has running down there, Selena instructed, gesturing out the window, precisely at the edge of the Thorn Ranch boundary. It breaks the aesthetic. We need a dense, tall hedge, fast-growing. Of course, Ms. Vance. We can do an Italian cypress barrier, perhaps 30 feet tall. It's pricey, but it will solve the visual contamination, the architect replied smoothly on the screen. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed sharply, the formal, aggressive tone of the service gate. Ms. Vance, there is a gentleman here, says he's a courier. He requires a signature for legal documents." Her house manager sounded flustered. Selena frowned. "Legal? For what?" "Just sign for it. It's probably something tedious from the HOA." "He says it requires your signature, ma'am." "Certified process service." Selena sighed, rolling her eyes for the benefit of her architect. "Honestly, the inefficiency of people." "Excuse me, Marcus, I have to go deal with this. It's probably a subpoena for some old fund I sold 3 years ago. Back in 5. She met the process server, a short, severe man in a cheap suit in the foyer. He was impersonal and efficient, shoving a clipboard and a pen into her hands. "Selena Vance? Sign here, verifying receipt of notice of intent." She scribbled her name, irritated, and took the heavy envelope. It felt significant in her hands, unlike the feather-light weight of her usual correspondence. She ripped it open in the living room, tossing the clipboard onto a silk ottoman. Her eyes scanned the first page, expecting a lawsuit over the $10,000. Instead, she was met with cold, impersonal language. Pursuant to recorded land documents 47321B and State Utility Code 12.04A, this notice serves to inform the current title holder of parcel VCA, known as Vance Crest, that the easement holder, Thorn Agricultural Holdings, intends to exercise its full rights to the 50-50-foot utility corridor effective immediately for the purpose of essential repairs and modern high-tension line installation. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. "What is this? Elias still playing his little games?" She immediately dialed her personal attorney, Robert, a slick corporate lawyer based in the city. "Robert, it's Selena. I just got served with the most ridiculous legal notice. It's some obscure old utility easement nonsense from that rancher, Elias Thorne. It sounds like he's trying to be a pest after I paid him for the gate damage. Can you just send a cease and desist?" Robert's voice, usually dripping with confident entitlement, was cautious. "Slow down, Selena. What exactly is the easement? Give me the parcel number and the recorded document number. I need to look at the original deeds. Easement law is tricky, especially historical ones." Selena, annoyed by his lack of immediate solution, read off the numbers. The silence on the line stretched for a minute, broken only by the rapid tap of Robert's keyboard. "Selena, I'm pulling up the plat maps now. This is not a nuisance case. This is a problem," Robert finally said, his voice dropping an octave. "That easement, document 47321B, is real. It was established in 1948 before the whole area was zoned. It grants Thorne Holdings rights to run a 50-foot wide corridor from the county road to the canyon edge for infrastructure maintenance. It's ironclad." Selena walked over to her pristine glass wall, the midday sun glinting off the polished floors. 50 feet wide, so what? They can dig a trench on the far side of the property. What does it affect? Selena, look at the plat map. That 50-foot corridor runs diagonally across the corner of your property to connect their northernmost feedlot to the main grid. But more importantly, your entire paved entry road, the circular drive, and a significant portion of your front landscaping, all of it is within that 50-foot boundary. A cold knot formed in Selena's stomach. Define significant portion, Robert. The original survey shows the path of the existing, albeit unused, high-tension lines. The new plan they submitted, the modernization plan, shows the new pole placement starting roughly 38 feet inside your property line, right where your rose garden and the reflecting pool are. And the access path for the heavy equipment necessary to install these new poles runs directly over your main paved driveway and, according to the setback, comes within 5 feet of your glass kitchen wall. Selena stared at the panoramic view of the valley, but now all she saw was the line 5 feet from her feet, the invisible boundary that suddenly felt like a wall of concrete. "They can't build a power line 5 feet from my house. That's a massive devaluation. That's a civil rights violation," she cried out, her voice cracking. "It's not, Selena! The easement was registered before your property was developed. When the builder, Vance Crest Corp., acquired the land, they should have had a title examination showing this exact issue. Your own company, your husband's company, took the risk. Thorne is simply exercising a pre-existing legally superior right. And what's worse, they're invoking the right for a utility upgrade. That carries immediate domain authority. We can fight the scope, maybe delay it, but we can't stop the access. Selena dropped into a white leather chair, the feeling of absolute control draining out of her. Elias, that son of a rancher. He did this deliberately. Of course he did, Selena. He didn't settle for $10,000. He just bought the right to hold your property hostage. How long do we have? The notice states that the preliminary survey and staking will begin within 24 hours to prepare for Phase 1 heavy equipment deployment. They're moving fast. They want to set a physical precedent. Back at the ranch, Elias had moved his operation outside. He and Javier stood on the highest point of the north pasture, looking down the slope toward the shimmering, obnoxious white structure of Vance Crest. The process server confirmed delivery at 9:07 a.m., Elias said, checking his watch. That means she's been panicking for 2 hours. What's Phase 1, boss? Surveying is simple. Elias smiled a genuine, grim smile. The surveying isn't the point. The arrival of the surveyors is the point. I hired a crew that specializes in hostile land acquisitions. They don't just use tripods. I want a bulldozer, Javier. A clean, yellow, brand-new Caterpillar D9. Have it driven up the county road, turn onto the new temporary ranch gate, and drive it down the old utility axis. Selena Vance spent the night watching the silent yellow hulk of the bulldozer. It sat just beyond the perimeter of her perfect landscaping, a low-slung mechanical predator patiently awaiting the order to feed. The line of orange tape, anchored 5 feet from her kitchen glass, felt like a tripwire. Every time a car passed on the distant county road, she imagined it was the advance guard of the construction crew. Sleep was impossible. By 5 a.m., she had burned through 5,000 calories of nervous energy and 5 years of carefully curated emotional control. She had done the one thing she never did when facing a business problem. She called her husband. Jeff Vance, the architect of Vance Crest and the source of Selena's entitlement, was in Zurich finalizing a hostile takeover of a Swiss investment firm. His voice, when it answered, was clipped, annoyed, and laced with the static confidence of a man who believed the world existed solely to facilitate his transactions. Selena, it's 2 a.m. here. This better not be about the baby's nap schedule. What is it? It's the rancher Elias Thorne. He's gone completely insane, Jeff. He's not accepting the settlement. He's using that ancient utility easement to put high-tension power lines 5 feet from the glass. They staked it out yesterday. There's a bulldozer sitting on the boundary right now, staring at the house. Her voice was tight, high-pitched, betraying a fear he rarely heard. A deep sigh came through the line, heavy with irritation. Power lines? Selena, don't be dramatic. I had Robert Klein look at that easement years ago. It's a dead letter. It's antiquated, never used. Tell Robert to file for an injunction citing malicious intent and adverse possession. This is a harassment suit, not infrastructure. Robert already looked. He said it's ironclad. He said we can't stop the access. And Elias wouldn't talk to Robert. He shut him down instantly. He told Robert to talk to Tiberius Stone. Tiberius Stone, Jeff. The old guard land shark. This isn't Robert's league. That detail finally cracked Jeff's corporate shell. Tiberius Stone was not hired for a $10,000 gate repair. He was retained to ensure mutually assured legal destruction. Jeff was silent for a moment, the sound of his own arrogance collapsing. Tiberius Stone, Jeff repeated, the words slow and dangerous. He's running an indemnity play. He's trying to hold the title hostage. This isn't about a gate. This is about forcing a catastrophic buyout or destroying the residual value of the property before we can sell the last 8 lots. The value is already destroyed, Jeff. Who buys a $12 million custom home with a power line humming outside the kitchen? And they dug up the original plat maps. Our entire main entry drive is within the 50-foot corridor. He's going to tear up the travertine, the rose garden, everything. Don't panic, Jeff snapped, though the coldness of his voice was a clear sign he was doing exactly that internally. We fight fire with napalm. I'm flying back on the Gulf Stream tonight. I'll be on the ground by 9 a.m. tomorrow. In the meantime, call Blake Hayes at Richter & Hayes. They are the best litigation firm in the state for aggressive, high-value injunctions. Tell him to prep a temporary restraining order based on environmental impact and noise pollution during construction. Do not talk to the rancher again. Do not look at the bulldozer. Just focus on stopping the clock. Selena felt a sliver of her confidence return. Jeff was entering the battle. Elias Thorne might own the land, but Jeff Vance owned the courts. Elias was not waiting for the injunction. He knew it was coming. A temporary restraining order was the inevitable knee-jerk defense of any wealthy target. His advantage was speed and the depth of his preparation. He stood with Javier near the new, temporary gate line just before 11 a.m. Behind them were two flatbed trucks carrying massive steel lattice poles and a heavy-duty backhoe. A third truck carried the drilling rig necessary to bore the deep footings for the power poles. The air thrummed with diesel energy. "They're going for a TRO on environmental, boss," Javier reported, leaning in. "My cousin works at the county planning office. Hayes from Richter and Hayes filed the preliminary paperwork 20 minutes ago. It's an 11th-hour attempt. They'll have a judge signed off by 4 p.m., maybe sooner." Elias checked his watch. "We have 4 hours, then. 4 hours to make this a fait accompli." He pointed at the backhoe driver, a man named Tonio, a grizzled local who understood the concept of aggressive enthusiasm. "Tonio, I need that driveway gone. I want the travertine lifted, stacked neatly off-site. We need to be able to argue we are minimizing damage, and I want the underlying foundation scored for the drilling rig. I need the noise. I need the dust, and I need the rose garden excavated down to the bedrock. We are performing the environmental remediation survey right there, as per the notice. No delays. If anyone, Selena, her lawyer, or the police, tries to interfere, refer them to the number on this card." Elias handed Javier a clean, white card with only the firm name, Tiberius Stone and Associates. "The drilling rig?" Javier asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We're actually putting up a power line?" "No," Elias said, a cold glint in his eye. "We're installing the footings. Once the footings are drilled and poured, the easement is physically occupied, and the status quo is fundamentally changed. An injunction can stop future work, but it can't usually order us to unpour concrete. We are not building a power line today. We are building an immovable, permanent problem." At 1 p.m., the silence at Vance Crest was annihilated. The sound started as a dull, mechanical roar that rapidly escalated into a grinding, ripping cacophony. The sound of Tonio's backhoe hitting the pristine travertine driveway was like a gunshot in the sterile air of the mansion. Selena, now dressed in a severe black suit, was on a conference call with Blake Hayes, Jeff's high-priced litigator. She ran back to the window. The scene outside was one of pure, brutal efficiency. Tonio was attacking the circular drive with a methodical savagery that was terrifying. The heavy treads of the backhoe churned the manicured lawn into black mud. The travertine pavers, which had cost $40 a square foot, were being scooped up and dumped unceremoniously into a large metal skip. Dust, the red, fine, inescapable dust of the valley, was already beginning to coat the massive glass wall of her house. "Mr. Hayes, they're digging. They are literally tearing up the driveway right now. It's unbearable. I can't hear myself think." Selena shrieked into the phone. Hayes's voice was tight and strained. "Selena, you need to stay inside. Do not engage. We are filing the TRO, but we need time for the judge to review the noise complaints and the environmental risk assessment. This is what Thorne wants, to provoke us. He's working against the clock. Just record the noise." "Record everything." Selena hung up and rushed to the patio door, throwing it open despite the lawyer's instructions. "Stop! You stop that right now!" she yelled, the sound swallowed instantly by the roaring diesel engine of the backhoe. Tonio, wearing thick ear defenders, glanced over, gave a brief, utterly neutral head tilt, and continued to rip up a section of her beloved hybrid tea roses, roots, and dirt flying into the air. He was a professional. He was simply following the explicit instructions to perform environmental remediation. The drilling rig, a massive, towering piece of machinery, was slowly backed onto the excavated drive. It looked like a weapon of war. Selena stepped back inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. The glass was no longer a beautiful window. It was a drum vibrating with the noise. The dust was visible now, a fine red cloud descending onto the flawless white furniture. She had a sudden visceral vision of the whole house being covered in the grime of the ranch, the land invading her castle. At 3:45 p.m., Jeff Vance arrived. He hadn't waited for the Gulf Stream. He had chartered a helicopter, landing illegally in the golf course adjacent to the development. He was pure fury, impeccably dressed, but radiating the kind of uncontrolled rage that only comes from a loss of absolute power. He stalked into the living room, kicking a piece of dust-covered velvet. "What in God's name is this mess, Selina? You let a rancher do this?" Selina pointed weakly out the window. The travertine was gone. The foundation for the circular drive was scored, and the drilling rig was now actively boring the first deep footing hole 5 feet from the house. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the drill vibrating through the floor felt tectonic. "Hayes called," Selina whispered, her voice hoarse from shouting over the noise. "The judge signed the TRO. It's effective at 4:15 p.m. They're driving the court order up here now." Jeff grabbed the phone, calling Hayes. "Blake, when will they be here?" "They're drilling. They're putting in the footings. If they pour concrete before the service, the order is meaningless. We're moving, Jeff, but the ranch is 30 miles out. They should arrive by 4:25 p.m., hopefully before the concrete trucks get there." "Just stall them! Have security!" Jeff slammed the phone down. Security was useless. Elias's crew was working on Elias's legally acquired easement. He ran outside, stepping gingerly over the exposed earth. "Hey, you! The foreman!" Javier, who was standing 20 yards away directing the rig, walked slowly over. He held up the Tiberius Stone card. "All communications through this number, sir. We have permits for all essential utility work. This work is purely malicious. We have assigned TRO effective in minutes. You stop this work now, or I will have this equipment impounded and you personally sued for corporate espionage." Jeff Vance was not a man accustomed to losing, especially not to an opponent whose net worth could be tallied in cattle and acreage rather than liquidity. The moment he grasped the devastating implications of the water easement, a legal, slow-motion demolition of his most valuable personal asset, he transformed from an arrogant developer into a corporate titan at war. He didn't just fight. He leveled the field. His first move was not through a small-time litigator, but a dedicated crisis management firm run by a man named Harrison Voss. "I need a narrative." "Voss!" Jeff barked into his secure phone line, pacing the dust-coated, vibrating living room of Vance Crest. The drill rig, briefly halted by the TRO, was back in furious action, boring the first of the deep pilot holes for the water line. Paint Elias Thorne as a lunatic, a reclusive, unhinged land baron obstructing essential county infrastructure. Use the power line threat, but frame it as an act of domestic eco-terrorism. Make him toxic to the press. I want him on the front page of every local paper as the man who is single-handedly blocking progress and harassing a family with a newborn. Voss, a specialist in turning inconvenient truths into profitable lies, was delighted. "Done, Mr. Vance. We'll deploy the family under siege angle by midday. Simultaneously, I'll leak a carefully edited version of the easement dispute, focusing on the malicious intent. We'll call him the Baron of Barbed Wire." Jeff's second call was to his network of financial sharks in the city. "I want a detailed financial profile of Thorne Holdings. Everything. Their lines of credit, their debt structure, their feed suppliers. Find me the single most vulnerable point in his operation. I want the cost of his feed to double by next week. I want his bank loan officers to wake up sweating. I want to freeze the ground beneath his feet until he can't afford the diesel to run that damn rig." On the Thorne Ranch, the atmosphere was one of quiet, grim resolve. Elias was not blind to the counterattack. He stood with Javier near the main ranch house, watching a flurry of incoming emails and phone calls managed expertly by Tiberius Stone's digital team. "They're hitting us, boss." "Hard," Javier said, scrolling through a local news website. "Look at this headline. Rancher's vengeance, wealthy family harassed by antiquated land grab. They're using the baby, Elias. That's low." Elias, calm as a canyon river, only glanced at the headline. The press is Jeff's weakness and his strength. He lives by reputation. "We live by the truth of the soil. Let him talk." Tiberius has the counter-narrative ready. Thorne Ranch protects essential agricultural water rights against reckless development. Simple, factual, and backed by state water use statutes. The local community will read the truth regardless of the city paper. What about the money hit? They just called our bank, the one that holds the operating line. The loan officer is asking nervous questions about our sudden excessive legal expenditures. Elias smiled faintly. Anticipated. I didn't hire Stone on credit, Javier. I paid him a large, non-refundable retainer with the money I sold the northernmost canyon pasture for 6 months ago, the land he wanted for his Phase 3 lots. The Vances haven't yet realized that I entered this fight with no debt, and I'm funding it with assets he thought he was going to buy. Tell the loan officer the truth. Our liquidity is excellent, and the legal fees are a necessary cost of doing business against predatory neighbors. We don't hide our books. We keep them clean. Elias turned, his focus settling back on the work at Vance Crest, visible now only as a thin plume of red dust rising against the blue sky. They can fight the media war all they want, but they cannot stop the trench. That is the only battle that matters right now. At Vance Crest, the trench war was physically and emotionally crippling Selena. The rhythmic, deep thump, thump, thump of the drill rig, followed by the grinding, sucking noise of the vacuum trucks pulling the slurry was continuous. It began at 7 a.m. and ceased only at 6 p.m., legally mandated work hours that felt like a deliberate torture schedule. Selena couldn't use the kitchen. The noise made conversation impossible, and the fine red dust, despite constant cleaning by the house staff, infiltrated everything. It coated the white marble floors, settled on the glass coffee table, and, most terrifyingly, accumulated on the sill of the nursery window. She found herself spending hours sitting in the far corner of the house, holding her infant daughter, watching the drilling rig through binoculars. It was an exercise in masochism, but she couldn't look away. It was a tangible measure of her loss of control. Her husband, Jeff, was useless. He spent his days in frantic, angry conference calls, flying between the house and the city courthouse, trying to appeal the water easement on grounds of disproportionate environmental burden. He saw the house not as a home, but as a compromised asset, and his contempt for Selena, for her carelessness in hitting the gate 4 times, was barely masked. One afternoon, a structural engineer Jeff had flown in from Denver, a nervous man named Dr. Chen arrived to inspect the area. Selena followed him into the excavated driveway. The trench for the water line was being dug to 12 feet now, a raw, terrifying gash in the earth that ran diagonally, 5 feet from her primary living wall. Dr. Chen walked the length of the trench line, taking sonic readings and soil samples. When he emerged, his face was pale beneath the construction dust. "Mr. Vance, I've completed the initial survey," Dr. Chen said, addressing Jeff, who was pacing nearby. "The water table here is unpredictable, and the foundation is a simple slab-on-grade, as is common for these fast-built developments. Just get to the point, Doctor. Can we stop the vibrations? Can we get an emergency stay?" Jeff demanded. Dr. Chen shook his head grimly. "It's too late. The digging itself isn't the main issue. It's the depth and proximity. Digging to 15 feet, 5 feet from your main load-bearing structure without adequate shoring means the lateral soil pressure has fundamentally shifted. We're detecting microfractures in the slab already, and the vibrations from the drilling rig have accelerated the settlement." Selena felt a dizzying coldness spread through her. "What does that mean? Microfractures? It means your foundation is compromised, ma'am. It's not a reversible problem. If they continue digging for the next 2 weeks, the structural integrity of this wall, and potentially the entire corner of the house, will be irreversibly damaged. We will see significant settling, foundation movement, and stress points. It will require tens of millions of dollars of pier and beam retrofitting if it's even salvageable. I estimate the value of this property has already dropped by 60%. Jeff stared at the deep, muddy trench, then back at the engineer. His $12 million monument to success was turning into a $5 million liability, all because of 4 gate panels. You're saying he's destroyed the house? Legally? He is legally exercising a property right, which is resulting in structural damage to your adjacent property. Unless you can prove the trench is not necessary for agricultural utility, a near impossible task, yes. Mr. Thorne is legally and systematically destroying your home. Dr. Chen packed up his equipment and left, leaving Jeff and Selena alone on the raw, violated earth of their former driveway. Jeff finally turned to his wife, his eyes blazing with a dangerous, calculating intensity that had nothing to do with love or concern. "You!" he hissed, pointing a finger at her chest. "And your petty, drunken carelessness." 4 gates. 4 insignificant pieces of wood. This whole goddamn mess, the loss of the lots, the legal fees, the destruction of this house, it all goes back to your entitlement. Selena, broken by the noise and the doctor's assessment, looked back at him, seeing the naked truth of their marriage reflected in the glass wall. "My entitlement? You built a shrine to your own ego 5 feet from a legal boundary you thought you could ignore. You told me that easement was a dead letter. I was focused on the hostile takeover in Zurich. I was working. You were supposed to manage this, and you broke his property 4 times. He saw the weakness, Selena. He saw the carelessness, and he punished it. And now we are paying for your mistake." Selena didn't argue. She turned her head slowly back toward the glass. The sunlight caught the wall, and there it was. Not the earth shattering the foundation, but a tiny, perfect spider-web fracture in the lower corner of the glass panel nearest the trench. It was barely visible, a hairline crack where the glass met the floor. It was the first visible sign of the house's terminal injury, and it wasn't caused by the trenching. It was caused by the continuous deep vibration transferring from the subsoil, the physical manifestation of Elias Thorne's cold. Savage consequence. Selena felt a new kind of coldness, a survival instinct that eclipsed her panic. Jeff was useless. His corporate savagery only led to more noise and more legal filings. Elias had brought the fight back to the land, and to win, she realized, she couldn't use lawyers or media. She had to fight Elias on his terms, using the very thing he cherished. She looked at Jeff, obsessed with his phone and his next legal maneuver, and knew he wouldn't stop the rancher. She would have to do it herself, and it wouldn't be legal. She finally understood the true weight of the conflict. The $10,000 had merely been the cost of her tuition. As the sun began to set, casting long, bruised shadows over the excavated earth, Selena walked into the garage, past the spot where the G-Wagon should have been. She opened the